In a town where everyone knew his name, he was more than just a cop. He was a hero. Medals on his chest, a smile for every neighbor, and a reputation for unwavering integrity. Parents told their children to trust him. Businesses left their doors unlocked, knowing he was on patrol. But beneath the polished badge and warm handshakes, a chilling secret festered. How did the man everyone loved, the one they believed would lay down his life for them, scam the entire town, and become the prime suspect in a murder that would shatter their faith forever? In November 2021, in Millbrook, Montana, chills run down the spine of a small town as whispers spread. Detective Marcus Holloway, the trusted protector, is dead. But little do they know, this is just the beginning of a mind game. 43 residents had invested in a promising opportunity, all thanks to Detective Holloway's reassuring smile and badge. Trust was implicit, but when they check their accounts one fateful morning, their world crumbles. Zero balances stare back at them. They rush to the office address to find an empty lot. The phone number is disconnected. As panic sets in, the people turn to the one person they trusted, only to discover Detective Holloway's shocking death. But here's the thing that will make your blood run cold. Detective Marcus Holloway didn't die that day in November 2021. He's still out there, and the FBI believes he's already chosen his next target. But the question is, where could he be? This is a story about a man who weaponized his badge and turned an entire community's faith into his ATM, but made one critical mistake that would eventually expose the darkest secret of all. Our story begins not with crime, but with a phone call that changed everything. FBI agent Jennifer Martinez was sitting in her Denver office when her secure line rang. On the other end was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police detective with news that would reopen one of the Bureau's most frustrating cold cases. "Agent Martinez, we need to talk. We found something in the mountains that's going to completely change your investigation." For context, Agent Martinez had been working the Millbrook case for months. On paper, it seemed straightforward. A corrupt police detective had scammed his community out of over $1 million, then killed himself rather than face the consequences. Case closed, victims left to pick up the pieces. Our story begins not with the crime, but with a phone call that changed everything. FBI agent Jennifer Martinez was sitting in her Denver office when her secure line rang. On the other end was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police detective with news that would reopen one of the Bureau's most frustrating cold cases. "Agent Martinez, we need to talk. We found something in the mountains that's going to completely change your investigation." For context, Agent Martinez had been working the Millbrook case for months. On paper, it seemed straightforward. A corrupt police detective had scammed his community out of over $1 million, then killed himself rather than face the consequences. Case closed, victims left to pick up the pieces. But Martinez had always felt something was off about Detective Marcus Holloway's supposed suicide. The timing was too convenient, the evidence was too neat, and there was one detail that had been nagging at her for months, a detail that nobody else seemed to find significant. The day before Holloway's apparent suicide, a local woman named Sarah Chen had gone missing. Chen was a forensic accountant who had been asking questions about Holloway's investment scheme. Her disappearance had been treated as a separate case, but Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that the two events were connected. But let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Millbrook, Montana, population 8,400. Picture the kind of place where the local diner still has a coffee club that meets every morning at 6 a.m., where the high school football games are the biggest events of the fall, and where leaving your car unlocked overnight isn't just common, it's expected. This was a community built on trust. Trust between neighbors, trust in institutions, and most importantly, trust in the men and women who wore the badge. So, when Police Chief Robert Yamamoto announced in March 2019 that they were getting a new detective, an experienced officer from Denver who wanted to serve in a smaller community, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Attach visual narrator. "We were thrilled," Yamamoto would later tell federal investigators, his voice heavy with regret. "Marcus brought credentials and experience that we'd never had before. He seemed exactly what we needed." Detective Marcus Holloway was everything the department could have asked for. Professional, articulate, well-dressed, and most importantly, He seemed genuinely invested in becoming part of the community. Within his first month, he'd joined the Rotary Club, volunteered to coach Little League, and had become a fixture at Murphy's Diner, where he'd sit at the counter every morning, chatting with locals about everything from crop prices to town gossip. But there was something the good people of Millbrook didn't know about their new detective, something that wouldn't be discovered until it was far too late to matter. Marcus Holloway didn't exist. Narrator: the man who walked into Millbrook that spring day was actually Michael Harrison, and he was one of the most sophisticated con artists the FBI had ever encountered. What made Harrison so dangerous wasn't just his ability to lie. It was his talent for becoming someone else entirely. Born in Phoenix in 1985, Harrison had been perfecting the art of deception since his teenage years. But unlike most criminals who get caught because they're impulsive or sloppy, Harrison was methodical. He studied his marks, researched his roles, and most importantly, he understood that the best cons aren't about stealing money, they're about stealing trust. For 15 years, Harrison had been at least 6 different people. There was David Miller, the insurance adjuster who had disappeared with earthquake relief funds in California. Robert Stone, the financial advisor who had vanished with retirement accounts in Nevada. James Mitchell, the federal contractor who had run investment schemes across 3 states. Each identity was carefully crafted and professionally executed. Harrison would spend months researching his targets, learning their vulnerabilities, and understanding their communities. He had a particular genius for exploiting small towns, places where a professional appearance and the right credentials could open any door. But Harrison had a weakness that would eventually become his downfall: gambling. By 2018, his debts to various bookmakers and loan sharks exceeded $180,000. He needed a big score, something that would set him up for life and get dangerous people off his back. That's when he began planning his most audacious scheme. He wasn't just going to pretend to be a businessman or a contractor this time. He was going to become a police officer. Creating Marcus Holloway took Harrison 6 months of meticulous preparation. He forged police academy records, created fake employment histories, and manufactured glowing references from supervisors who had never existed. He studied police procedures, learned law enforcement terminology, and practiced the authoritative demeanor that would make his deception bulletproof. But most importantly, he researched small police departments across the Mountain West, looking for the perfect target. He needed a department that was understaffed, underfinanced, and desperate enough for an experienced detective that they wouldn't look too closely at his credentials. Millbrook was perfect. The department consisted of just 6 officers in total, including an aging chief who was more than happy to delegate complicated cases. Their budget was tight, their technology was outdated, and their background check process was, to put it charitably, more of a courtesy than an investigation. Harrison spent weeks perfecting his Marcus Holloway persona before contacting Chief Yamamoto. He memorized the town's history, studied local business owners and community leaders, and crafted a backstory that would make him seem like the perfect fit for their community. When he finally made the call in March 2019, he was no longer Michael Harrison, a career criminal. He was Detective Marcus Holloway, a dedicated public servant, ready to protect and serve the good people of Millbrook, Montana. The transformation was complete, and it was about to destroy dozens of lives. I fear how precise Harrison was in his scheme. He didn't rush at all. While most con artists are looking for a quick score and a fast exit, Harrison was playing a completely different game. He spent his first year in Millbrook doing exactly what a good police officer should do: solving cases, building relationships, and earning trust. He was genuinely good at police work, probably because many of the skills that make a successful con artist, reading people, understanding motivations, and gaining trust, are the same skills that make a good detective. His case clearance rate was impressive. His community involvement was exemplary. His reputation was spotless. But all of this was just set up for the real con. Harrison spent that first year carefully studying the community's financial landscape. He learned who had money, who was worried about their financial future, and who might be vulnerable to the right kind of pitch. He paid particular attention to retirees and business owners, people with significant assets who might be looking for investment opportunities. He also used his position to gather intelligence that most con artists could never access. As a police officer, he could run background checks, access financial records, and most importantly, he could learn people's fears and vulnerabilities through seemingly casual conversations. By the end of 2019, Harrison had compiled detailed profiles on over 100 potential victims. He knew their net worth, their family situations, their hopes and fears, and he was ready to begin the largest small-town financial fraud in Montana history. The timing couldn't have been better. The COVID-19 pandemic was just beginning to impact small communities across America, and people were worried about their economic futures. Retirement accounts were fluctuating wildly, small businesses were struggling, and everyone was looking for some kind of financial security. That's when Detective Marcus Holloway began talking about an incredible opportunity. The pitch was very well put. As a cop, Holloway claimed to have inside information about government contracts and development projects. Specifically, he had learned about a project that would bring massive income to the Millbrook residents. The project was still in the preliminary planning stages, which meant that getting in early on the investment opportunities could result in enormous returns. But here's what made the pitch so believable. Holloway wasn't just asking for money. He was offering to include his neighbors and friends in what he claimed was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He presented himself not as a salesman, but as someone who cared enough about his community to share inside information that could benefit everyone. To make it even more credible, he had created an elaborate fake company called Mountain West Development Solutions, complete with professional brochures, a sophisticated website, and even testimonials from supposed previous investors. He held information sessions at the community center where he presented detailed PowerPoint presentations about economic development and investment strategies. The presentations were professional. Holloway spoke with the authority of someone who clearly understood government contracting and development finance. He had maps showing proposed highway routes, financial projections that seemed conservative and realistic, and most importantly, he was putting his reputation as a police officer behind every word. Who better to trust with your money than a cop? He would ask potential investors, flashing that badge that had become his most powerful weapon. My badge is my bond. His first victim, Harold Brennan, was a 76-year-old retired rancher who had recently sold his family's land after 3 generations of farming. The sale had earned him $200,000, money he had planned to leave to his grandchildren while living comfortably on the interest and his social security. Harold had known Marcus Holloway for almost a year by the time the detective approached him about the investment opportunity. They had developed a friendship of sorts, built around their shared morning coffee routine at Murphy's Diner. Holloway had even helped Harold's grandson with a minor legal issue, refusing payment and saying that helping neighbors was just part of the job. So when Holloway pulled Harold aside after one of the community investment presentations and offered him a chance to get in on the ground floor of the project, Harold didn't hesitate. Marcus showed me all the paperwork, Harold would later tell investigators, his voice shaking with a combination of anger and humiliation. Government contracts, development plans, financial projections. It looked completely legitimate. And this was a police officer, someone I trusted completely, telling me this was a sure thing. Harold invested $50,000 initially, with a promise of 15% returns within 6 months. Within a week, word spread through Millbrook's tight-knit community that Harold Brennan had gotten involved in Marcus Holloway's investment program. And if Harold Brennan trusted it, Harold, who was known for being careful with money, then it must be legitimate. The floodgates opened, attach visual. Make time, passing effect, optional. Over the next 18 months, the scheme grew exponentially. Holloway was collecting between $20,000 and $50,000 per month from new investors, all while maintaining his duties as a police detective and his reputation as a pillar of the community. The amounts ranged from $5,000 from a young couple who had scraped together their home down payment to $180,000 from the local bank president who had liquidated his entire retirement portfolio. Teachers invested their summer savings. Small business owners invested their emergency funds. Retirees invested their life savings. Altogether, the total of 43 different people eventually hand over money to Detective Marcus Holloway, trusting him with over $1.2 million in total. Every dollar went directly into personal accounts that Holloway had set up under various fake business names, and every dollar was immediately used to pay off gambling debts, purchase luxury items, or finance an increasingly expensive lifestyle that he carefully kept hidden from his victims. But maintaining a Ponzi scheme requires constant attention, and by late 2021, the scheme was beginning to show cracks. Some investors were asking questions about when they could expect to see returns. The highway project that was supposed to break ground in the spring had been delayed, according to Holloway, due to bureaucratic red tape and environmental concerns. To buy more time, Holloway began paying some investors small amounts, what he called preliminary returns, using money from new investors. It was a classic Ponzi scheme structure, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain as the pool of potential new investors in the small community was rapidly shrinking. Harrison knew his time was running out, but he had always been a planner, and he had been preparing for this possibility from the very beginning. He had escape routes mapped out, false identities prepared, and offshore accounts ready to receive the stolen funds. There was just one problem. Someone was watching him. Sarah Chen was not supposed to be a threat. She was a 28-year-old forensic accountant who had moved to Millbrook in 2020 to care for her aging grandmother. She worked remotely for a firm in Billings, kept to herself mostly, and seemed like just another quiet newcomer trying to fit into small-town life. But Sarah had a professional background that made her uniquely dangerous to someone like Harrison. As a forensic accountant, she was trained to spot financial irregularities, to notice patterns that others might miss, and most importantly, to ask the right questions when something didn't add up. Sarah became suspicious of Holloway during what seemed like a chance encounter at Murphy's Diner in July 2021. She was having lunch when she overheard him talking to another customer about the highway development project. As someone who regularly worked with government contracts in her professional life, certain details in Holloway's conversation struck her as odd. The timeline he described didn't match normal government project schedules. Some of the agencies he mentioned didn't typically handle highway development. The financial structures he was describing didn't align with how public works projects were usually funded. Attach visual narrator. Most people would have dismissed these inconsistencies as minor details, or assumed they simply didn't understand the complexities of government contracting. But Sarah Chen was a forensic accountant, and inconsistencies were red flags that demanded investigation. She began doing her own research, quietly and carefully. She couldn't find any public records of the highway project Holloway was promoting. There were no environmental impact studies filed with the state, no public hearings scheduled, no budget allocations in the Transportation Department's public documents. Most telling of all, there was no record of Mountain West Development Solutions in the state's business registration database. By October 2021, Sarah had compiled a detailed file that would have impressed any federal investigator. She had documentation proving that Holloway's investment company was entirely fictional. She had evidence that the highway project existed only in his presentations. She had even traced some of the fake testimonials on his website to stock photos and fabricated identities. But Sarah faced a terrifying dilemma that would have challenged even the most experienced investigator. How do you expose a police officer in a small town where everyone trusts law enforcement implicitly? How do you convince people that the person they've trusted with their life savings is actually a criminal? Who would believe her word against his? Sarah knew that if she was wrong, or if she couldn't prove her allegations conclusively, she would be destroyed. She would be labeled as a troublemaker, an outsider who had come to their community and tried to tear down one of their most respected citizens. She might even face legal action from Holloway himself. But if she was right and she did nothing, dozens of people were going to lose their life savings to a con artist with a badge. Sarah made the only choice she could live with. She decided to take her evidence to the FBI. She spent weeks carefully organizing her findings, creating a comprehensive report that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. She documented Holloway's lies, traced his fake business registrations, and even identified several suspicious financial transactions that suggested money was being moved out of state. On November 15, 2021, Sarah received a call from FBI agent Jennifer Martinez. Agent Martinez had reviewed Sarah's preliminary report and was impressed by the thoroughness of her investigation. They scheduled a meeting for the following Wednesday in Helena, where they would review all of Sarah's evidence and begin planning a federal investigation into police corruption. Sarah was excited but nervous. She knew that once she handed over her evidence to the FBI, there would be no going back. Detective Marcus Holloway's world was about to come crashing down, and she was the one who was going to bring it all to light. She had no idea that Marcus Holloway already knew exactly what she was planning. What Sarah didn't realize was that she had been under surveillance for months. Harrison, in his role as Detective Marcus Holloway, had access to certain investigative tools that he had been using to monitor anyone who might pose a threat to his operation. During a routine community policing visit to Sarah's grandmother's house in August, Harrison managed to install spyware on Sarah's computer. He had been reading her emails, monitoring her internet searches, and tracking her research into his background and business activities. By November, Harrison knew that Sarah had contacted the FBI. He knew about her evidence file. He knew about her scheduled meeting with Agent Martinez. And he knew that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse unless he took immediate action. But Harrison was a planner, and he had been preparing for this possibility from the beginning. He had multiple escape routes mapped out, false identities prepared, and contingency plans for every scenario he could imagine. There was just one scenario he hadn't fully prepared for: what to do about Sarah Chen. Harrison faced a critical decision. He could disappear immediately, abandon the remaining money in his accounts, and hope that the FBI investigation would move slowly enough for him to establish a new identity somewhere else. But that would mean leaving behind over $300,000 that he hadn't yet transferred to his offshore accounts. Or he could eliminate the threat that Sarah represented and buy himself time to execute a more complete escape plan. For someone who had spent years carefully avoiding violence, who had built his career on manipulation rather than force, it should have been an easy choice. But greed and desperation have a way of changing people's calculations. On November 20th, 2021, Harrison made a decision that would transform him from a white-collar criminal into something much more dangerous. Sarah Chen left her grandmother's house at 5:30 p.m. on November 20th, telling the elderly woman that she had a business meeting in Helena and would be staying overnight. It was a half-truth that Sarah hoped would keep her grandmother from worrying. Sarah was driving south on Highway 287, about 30 miles outside of Millbrook, when she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. It was Detective Holloway and his police cruiser, signaling for her to pull over. Sarah felt a moment of panic, wondering if somehow Holloway had discovered her investigation. But she quickly dismissed the thought as paranoia. This was probably just a routine traffic stop, maybe a broken taillight or an expired registration tag. Using his police authority, Holloway approached Sarah's window and explained that her vehicle matched the description of a car that had been involved in a hit-and-run accident earlier that day. Standard procedure required him to search the vehicle and bring her to the station for questioning. Sarah, like most law-abiding citizens, complied without question. After all, this was a police officer, someone she was supposed to trust and cooperate with. She had no reason to believe that the person sworn to protect and serve was actually the most dangerous threat she would ever encounter. Harrison helped Sarah transfer her belongings to his police cruiser, telling her that her car would be towed to the station for processing as potential evidence. He was calm, professional, and completely convincing in his role as a detective doing his job. As they drove away from Sarah's abandoned vehicle, Harrison was already calculating his next moves. He had maybe 48 hours before someone would report Sarah missing. Maybe 72 hours before anyone started asking serious questions about where Detective Marcus Holloway had gone. It would have to be enough time to execute the most elaborate disappearing act of his criminal career. What happened over the next 3 days would not be fully understood until years later, when federal investigators finally pieced together the timeline of Harrison's escape plan. Based on evidence recovered during the eventual investigation, authorities believe that Harrison took Sarah to a remote cabin he had been renting under a false name about 50 miles from Millbrook. For 3 days, Harrison held Sarah captive while he finalized the most crucial elements of his disappearance. During this time, he forced Sarah to help him transfer the remaining stolen money to offshore accounts and delete any digital evidence that might link him to the investment fraud. Sarah, with her expertise in forensic accounting, was valuable to him in covering his electronic tracks, but Harrison faced a problem that would challenge even his considerable skills in deception. As the detective assigned to Sarah's missing person case, a case he would inevitably have to investigate, his own sudden disappearance would immediately raise suspicions. He needed a way to vanish that wouldn't point directly back to him. His solution was both ingenious and horrifying. Add emphasis. On November 24th, Harrison put the final phase of his plan into motion. He called Chief Yamamoto and reported that he was feeling completely exhausted from working around the clock on the Sarah Chen case. He needed a day to rest and recharge so he could continue the investigation effectively. That same day, security cameras at a bank in Denver captured footage of a man matching Harrison's description, making a large cash withdrawal from an account linked to Mountain West Development Solutions. But this wasn't Harrison himself. It was an associate he had hired to help stage his own death. At 3:15 p.m., Harrison's police cruiser was found abandoned in a parking garage at Denver International Airport. His service weapon was locked in the trunk, along with his badge and a handwritten confession note that read, "I can't live with what I've done. I'm sorry. Marcus." The note was written in Harrison's handwriting and contained details about the investment fraud that only he would have known. It appeared to be a confession and suicide note, though nobody was ever found. Airport security footage showed a man resembling Harrison entering the terminal around 4 p.m., but the trail went cold after that. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no record could be found of Marcus Holloway boarding any flight that day. For all intents and purposes, Detective Marcus Holloway had committed suicide, racked with guilt over his financial crimes. The FBI investigation that followed would focus on recovering assets and helping victims, not on hunting a dead man. But Marcus Holloway wasn't dead, and neither, at that point, was Sarah Chen. Remember that phone call I mentioned at the beginning? The one that FBI agent Martinez received from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in March 2022? Well, here's what the RCMP detective had found in those Canadian mountains that would change everything. On May 14th, 2023, a hiker named Tom Bradley was exploring a remote trail near Jasper National Park when he discovered what appeared to be human remains, partially concealed between two boulders and scattered by wildlife. The remains were badly decomposed, but careful forensic analysis revealed several crucial details. This had not been an accidental death. Zip ties were found near the bones, duct tape residue, and most telling of all, a bullet fragment lodged in what remained of the skull. When the dental records came back, they confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. This was Sarah Chen, the missing forensic accountant from Millbrook, Montana. But here's the detail that changed everything. Based on decomposition patterns and other forensic evidence, Sarah had been alive for several weeks after Detective Marcus Holloway's supposed suicide in November 2021, which meant that Marcus Holloway, or rather Michael Harrison, was still alive. And he was a killer. The discovery of Sarah's remains triggered one of the largest international manhunts in recent years. The FBI, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and Interpol all joined the search for a man who had successfully fooled everyone into believing he was dead. The investigation revealed that Harrison's suicide had been an elaborate staging designed to end the official search for him while he and Sarah disappeared together, not as willing companions, but as captor and victim. During their time in Canada, Harrison had likely forced Sarah to help him access additional funds and further obscure the money trail using her accounting expertise. New evidence emerged suggesting that Harrison had been living in Canada under a false identity for months after his supposed death. Bank records showed suspicious transactions in Vancouver and Calgary that matched his known patterns. Security footage from various locations showed individuals who bore a resemblance to Harrison, though positive identification was difficult due to apparent changes in his appearance. The FBI now believes that Harrison underwent plastic surgery to alter his features and had established multiple false identities over several years. The man who had presented himself as a small-town police officer was actually a criminal mastermind with international connections and resources. Most disturbing of all, investigators discovered that the Millbrook scheme may not have been Harrison's first major fraud. Similar investment scams had occurred in small towns across the western United States over the previous decade, all involving someone matching Harrison's general description and using remarkably similar tactics. The total amount stolen from victims across all these schemes is estimated to exceed $5 million. As of today, Michael Harrison remains at large. Despite an international manhunt, a $250,000 reward for information leading to his arrest, and extensive media coverage, he has managed to evade capture for over 2 years since Sarah's body was discovered. The FBI believes he is likely living somewhere in Canada or Mexico, using false documents and an altered appearance to avoid detection. He is considered extremely dangerous, having demonstrated a willingness to kill to protect his criminal enterprise. But here's what keeps federal investigators awake at night. Harrison has spent his entire adult life perfecting the art of reinvention. He is a master of becoming exactly who people want him to be, of earning trust in communities where trust is everything, which means he could be anywhere right now. He could be in your town, wearing a new face, carrying new credentials, spinning new lies to new victims. He could be a businessman, a consultant, a contractor, or he could be wearing a badge again, because we know that worked perfectly for him once before. Digital forensics experts continue to track suspicious financial transactions that might be linked to Harrison. International law enforcement agencies share information about individuals who match his description or behavioral patterns. But Harrison has proven to be always one step ahead, always ready with another identity, another escape route. The people of Millbrook are still dealing with the aftermath of his betrayal. 43 families lost over $1.2 million to someone they trusted completely. Harold Brennan, now 80 years old, still works part-time to make ends meet. A young couple lost their home. A bank president had to delay his retirement by a decade. But the financial losses pale in comparison to the emotional devastation. Trust in law enforcement was shattered. The close-knit community that had welcomed Marcus Holloway with open arms was left fractured and suspicious. Sarah Chen's family continues to seek answers about their daughter's final weeks. Her grandmother passed away in 2023, never knowing the truth about what happened to Sarah. Her parents have hired private investigators to continue searching for justice. But the big question on everyone's mind is, where is Detective Marcus Holloway? Remember, he could be anyone, anywhere, wearing any face. The only thing we know for certain is that somewhere out there, a master manipulator is probably already choosing his next victim, his next community to destroy. Stay vigilant, stay suspicious, and remember that sometimes the people who seem most trustworthy are the ones you should trust the least. The hunt continues. The story isn't over. And until Michael Harrison is behind bars, no small community is truly safe from the kind of betrayal that destroyed Millbrook, Montana.